Welcome to the Eye of the Needle podcast, where we discuss healthcare innovation and explore how visionary entrepreneurs and change leaders are reshaping the future of our industry.
Welcome to this episode of the Eye of the Needle podcast. And today we're going to talk about those 10,000 pound healthcare gorillas. We used to call them 500 pound, but they've gotten much bigger. We're much bigger holders of the market share. And every time we see startups or a global company that's creating a new healthcare vertical, or even other companies that have been in the healthcare industry for a while, they always say, every time we work with them, they find it challenging to compete in a marketplace dominated by these 10,000 pound gorillas. And who are some of those? Kaiser in care delivery. You've got United and Optum in the Payvider space, CVS in retail. And of course, no conversation would be complete without talking about Epic in the EHR or even broader now technology space. So this episode, we're going to focus on Epic and what it takes to be successful in a market that's dominated by Epic. And we'll think about some of the strategies that are most useful to thrive in that space versus a battle-oriented approach. Often, in fact, when I am asked to advise a company and they're working on a battle plan to compete with Epic, I tell them from the get-go, you will lose if that's your strategy. And often we find companies who want to take down Epic or use but my technology is better than their solution philosophy. And if you have that mentality, you've already lost. The right strategy we found in order to survive and actually do very well and grow in ways that Epic and the other 10,000 pound gorillas can't is really to focus on value, and not just a little bit better or a 10%, but a 10 times value offering. And today, my guest and I will explore a great deal what that means and what that takes to be successful. Brendan Keeler, otherwise known as the API guy, is my guest today. And we're going to talk about Epic, its history, its ability to influence the marketplace, and then strategies that companies deploy to successfully compete, but also collaborate with Epic in this ecosystem we call healthcare. So when we talk about why these companies often fail, and when they try to battle, and we're going to talk about how the smartest ones can win by playing a different game. So welcome, Brendan. And I'd like to ask you to introduce yourself, please.
Hey, Pam. Thanks for having me on. I'm Brendan Keeler. I'm the Interoperability and technically Data Liquidity Practice Lead at HGD Health. We have the data liquidity piece, which I don't really know what that means, but it sounds fun. And I've worked in healthcare for over a decade, entirely focused on EHR integration, interoperability, data connectivity, and all the standards and regulatory pieces that go into that. And so I've worked at Epic for 5.5 years domestically, but mostly abroad in the Netherlands, which was an added challenge of translating Dutch to English on top of these different standards, working with the Dutch government on a number of regulatory initiatives, which was a fun task as a 25-year-old, but thus Epic gave to me. Went to Redox, helping applications connect to EHRs across up to 80 or 90 different EHRs that are popular on the market. Was on the Care Quality Advisory Board, which is the largest health information network and framework in the country. Moved over to Zeus Health, based out of Boston, founded by Jonathan Bush of Athena Health fame, cousin to George Bush, for those that don't know him by his own credentials. One of the most successful founders, of the past 2 decades in healthcare. That was a wild ride. Moved over to be head of product at Flexpa when my wife and I found out we were expecting a couple of years ago. Didn't want to be flying to Boston all the time. And then most recently moved over to HCD, where we provide digital health solutions, so legacy SaaS solutions, clearinghouses, providers, payers, with strategic consultancy and development capacity with over a decade's experience in EHR integration, interoperability, data standards to help them hit the ceiling of their potential to integrate the way that their workflow demands to hit that 10x value that you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that when you look at Epic, it's not really just about their technology. In fact, some people feel their technology may be the least of their strengths. They've got market dominance. There are huge barriers to entry. They're adopted everywhere. In fact, last year, according to Becker's, 29 new health systems implemented Epic, and we had a number of other smaller health systems, community hospitals, adopt Epic through partners. So they continue to grow, and it's very difficult to disrupt Epic's position. Can you give us a little bit of history from your knowledge and experience, and what factors really contribute to Epic's success?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Epic has existed since the 70s, but was really small until the 2000s. And people attribute their growth to the idea of regulatory capture.
Mm-hmm.
That's wrong. That's wrong. Like that's objectively wrong
Right.
and I can say this with confidence because that is public record. So the high tech or high Health Information Technology Policy Committee. So this was the
Right.
committee that advised Obama on meaningful use, which is where people
Right.
say Epic was in the room, like Judy's like worm tongue and Lord of the Rings whispering in Obama's ear. Like that's just not functionally not true. At the time, Epic was a disruptor. At the time, that those meetings are on public record, and so I went and listened to all of them, looked at the transcripts, and Judy is like in there and like very cautious, like says a few things
Sure.
at a very technical stance. So I don't think, of course, there could be private conversations, but by and large, like Oracle, Siemens, these players that were large at the time had every right to to take advantage of the same tailwinds. They were supporting the same standards, CCDN, these other things that were included, and to succeed, these tailwinds were available to all EHRs. And so, like the idea of regulatory capture that they manipulated so only they could succeed, I don't buy it. People love
Well,
a good thing.
they were strong, really, if you were an industry insider before meaningful use and before the High Tech Act really explored. I mean, Epic was already getting some traction in the early days, and they started on the ambulatory side, which a lot of people find kind of surprising. So, I mean, what do you think when it really boils down to it? What was their secret sauce?
So it's the integrated database. They are one big piece of software. And so when you are an enterprise with highly disparate functions, so you have cardiology, you have ICU, you have emergency room, the idea of stitching together best of breed, that's not how B2B software works in any industry. Actually, you see strong preference at the enterprise level across industries for big systems that do most of the functions, and you tack on a few point solutions. So it was highly appealing to health systems to say, wait a minute, this just works in some fashion with this Rube Goldberg machine that I've set up to connect the lab with the radiology with all these different departments. I don't need to do that for anything in my enterprise. And as consolidation happened as a result of ACA, as a result of Stark laws, as a result of all these factors that in healthcare pushed private practice to consolidate and then eventually associate with health system. You see this agnostic to technology that forced more and more into Epic's arms because you have more and more disparate, components, people, practices, urology practices. So my father's practice in New Jersey when I was born was 3 doctors, right? My grandfather, my dad, and another doctor, and then grew to 100 in all of South Jersey, and then was acquired by Summit Health. And so you even see it like very viscerally through my own family. I see this trend, and that plays to Epic's strengths, which is within the enterprise, and however large that integrated delivery network, is, to have just this big system that doesn't have all the wiring you have to do is a tremendous benefit. And so that is the key. That underpins their success.
And so many of their peers during that time grew through acquisition as opposed to having that integrated database. I remember early on you'd see some of the big names at the time, the McKessons, the Cerners, et cetera. They were always buying somebody else's company and bringing it into their suite, as opposed to Epic building their suite and growing in that integrated database. Is that fair?
Totally fair. It's a great point that dramatically underrated. Like mergers and acquisitions can be tremendous, but for B2B software, it is you have the burden of this huge difference between the softwares and how do you migrate. And so if when Cerner bought Siemens, it looks great on paper, but at some point you need to migrate people. And
Mhm.
when you're forcing them to migrate, they have the choice at that point to say, wait a minute, I already have these switching costs and this pain and this retraining, all the switching costs associated with B2B software, especially enterprise B2B software, is the greatest moat. The pain of switching, of data conversion, retraining, and reconnecting integrated systems is the moat. But when you say to them, actually, you have to go do it, they have a choice to go say, actually, maybe I'm going to go to Epic instead. And
Yeah.
so those mergers and acquisitions are a short-term gain that takes away as opportunity costs for building the things you need to build with a consolidated database, with a consistent schema and data model, so that things just work. And instead, you're just wiring things together and they don't work. And so it's hard to build that way because
Mhm.
M&A looks good, but the drawbacks are very, very clear that the organizations that don't acquire Epic and also Meditech have actually continually been successful. We see Meditech quite successful at the lower end, right? The rural, the
Right.
F2HCs, and
Right.
they also don't acquire. They also build in-house. They actually have a culture that's very similar to Epic in some
Right.
ways of promoting up and never hiring in, of not doing M&A. And so it's not surprising me that they're having success at that in the areas that Epic is a little too expensive for.
Sure, sure. Well, one of the things that I find fascinating is the culture that Epic has. I mean, it's kind of known as a whimsical corporate culture, and it's very unique. You know, you hear about their account managers being called BFFs, and their campus has a very creative set of themes to it. And of course, they've definitely, you mentioned her earlier, Judy, their founder. And for those of us in the industry, she is like Sharon Madonna. We go by one name, Judy. We don't say her full name, Judy Faulkner, because we all know who we're talking about. But do you have a couple of stories that maybe that culture has contributed to their success or to the relationships they have with their customers? What is it about that very unique culture that maybe helps support the fact that they're makes them a 10,000 pound gorilla in our industry?
Yeah, I mean, we can tell funny stories. We can tell, more in-depth cultural ones. So I'll start with the in-depth cultural ones, right? Like culturally, written into the bylaws and such, no mergers and acquisitions, right? That they will not acquire, they will not be acquired, right? There's this Jim Cramer, the money guy from a couple of years ago, was panned almost universally because he's like, oh, like Apple should acquire Epic, and in some ways it's like, oh, wait a minute, like Apple builds everything in house and has this sort of like, kind of like threatening view on developers, like so does
Right.
Epic, but
Right.
just can't happen. It functionally cannot happen because of this culture. And so to your earlier point, like that bylaw, that idea is their greatest strength. But any
Hmm.
strength is your Achilles heel, is your weakness. And right now, and we'll get to this, I think, probably later. Right now, that antagonism, or maybe not antagonism, but that belief of we must do it ourselves is exactly what's biting Apple and will bite Epic because it is your greatest strengths end up being your weaknesses universally across everything. And so that cultural value perhaps needs some changing in this era versus how it allowed them to grow to be so successful. So that's one. Judy, just in general, is a woman of intense brilliance, of attention to detail, of almost to a pedantic level, but like, in a way that as a leader, you're just like, okay, the bar is high. And
Right.
so when I lived in the Netherlands, I started the Dutch the way that it's manifested for me personally is I only have two communications ever when I worked there with her directly. One was when I started in the Netherlands. I started the Dutch weekly news watch or monthly news watch, which was just like, here's some healthcare stuff and where Epic is mentioned in the news. And I circulated in the office of 150 people, and then people in the U.S. said, "Hey, I want to listen to it." I guess I've always liked writing.
Right.
And then
And
all
you're
of a
good at it. So,
Thank you. Appreciate that. I
hmm
forgot to mention I write the Substack Health API guy, the Substack.com.
right.
But all of a sudden it gets to Judy and she messages me and it was just 3 words. It said, "This is good." I'm like, okay. And so then a couple months go by and I keep sending them, but I get busier with implementations and regulatory things. We were doing the first e-prescribing in the Netherlands. And all of a sudden I get an email from her on one of the ones I sent out that was a little rushed and it's just redlined. Just, and then she said, "This is sloppy." That was it. That's the only,
Good
and so,
versus sloppy. I think
yeah.
there's a big a difference there.
It just shows like she's got an attention to detail and she'll keep working, and she just said this in an interview from HIMSS to Modern Healthcare, from Brock Turner of Modern Healthcare. She says, "I'm going to keep working because people
Yeah.
that step away from work, they dwindle and fade." And so I've strong confidence that she'll continue to lead for a few more years and bring that culture. And what she's done, which is interesting, is write that into this trust and try to keep things going regardless of who's next. And I think it's been announced internally or maybe externally that Sumit Rana is the heir, the person who's going to take it on. As he's led engineering and things like that at Epic for a while, and so
Right.
he's brilliant in his own right. He
Right.
doesn't have the same personality as Judy. He's a different person, but I think she's really trying to infuse this vision, this consistency to continue on even after she moves on.
Well, and I think that's something our industry has had for a long time. We've had definite personalities at the helm of these different companies. You mentioned Jonathan Bush earlier. He's got a very different personality, and Neil Patterson, who launched Cerner, had a very different personality. But they were all very strong personalities in their right. And I think what that culture is uniquely Epic. No one else could deploy it, and it does tie back to her personality. But I think you're right. The attention to detail is really what I think keeps the customers coming back for more. But so many startups that I see, or as I mentioned earlier, companies that want to enter the healthcare market, they get very fixated on their own technology, and it could be, a gazillion times better, but they're absolutely, shocked when a customer won't adopt them over Epic or implement their technology over Epic. So if you see these types of companies out there kind of taking that, my stuff is so much better, my mousetrap is so much better. What do you think that type of mistake or other mistakes they may be making in their go to market strategy in regards to the epics of the world?
So I think you have to prove out to the provider organization you are selling to. These are enterprises. And I think so many people that come into healthcare or have new solutions are used to consumer sales or SMB sales. Enterprise sales are very different. You need to sell not just to your users and say, "Hey, I'm better," but to the top level stakeholders. And so, like focusing myopically on the small feature sets and things like that, you need to prove ROI. You need to prove that you're going to return value for the enterprise, so that the CRO is bought in, so that the CMO is bought in, and not just the departmental head or a random user. Product-led
Right.
growth isn't a reality for enterprise sales in almost all industries, especially ones that are regulated or have privacy considerations, and especially not in healthcare. And so I think that's one thing that is just consistently lost. They think they're being blocked by Epic. They think they have to beat Epic, and then they just miss that they just need to prove out 10x value. And then if if there's blockers, there's ways around that. But I think people tend to prefer to have the boogeyman to explain their own failures. It's a sort of cope, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so I think there's this old segment from Jobs of Apple when it's in the 90s and they're struggling. They are not what they are today, and they are now massive, right? top
Right.
top company in the world. And how did they get there? And this quote that just sticks in my head, is that he says, you know, we have to stop focus on Microsoft losing. That Microsoft losing shouldn't be a predicate for us winning at Apple. And I'm paraphrasing, but
No.
instead we need to focus on what we do that is so
Right.
much better than anyone
Right.
else. And if we continue to do that, we will be successful. And if you just, I hate this, I'm not a job, like let's quote Jobs type of guy. Typically, I think that's a pretty empty exercise oftentimes. But this one in particular is so true. When you are you're a disruptor, you need to focus on your value first and foremost. Why are you so good? Why should they choose you over default? Every industry has a default.
Right.
I have a default on I use Android because I'm a green bubbler nerd, and like it has a bunch of defaults. Why would I use an external calendar app? Why would I use external email app? It needs to be 10x better. And so you need to focus on the value so that you are adopted, that they choose to give you time and attention and focus. And if you have that ROI, if you can prove that you're a 10x workflow, then that's great. And you need to stay 10x better, knowing that the bar is going to keep rising with the default, with the baked in solution. This is not unique to Epic. This is not unique to
Right.
healthcare. Every B2B system of record, they exhaust their total addressable market. And then they say, within the enterprises I've sold to, how do I do more? How do I extract more?
Exactly.
And
Right.
so you go to look at property management systems like Yardi, they're the Epic of property management. They do the exact
Right.
same things. And point solutions, you need to go crush what you're doing, focus on why that's so valuable. And only when you've proven that out, figure how do I get connected? And the nice thing about healthcare is once you're doing that, we have unique weapons as disruptors, as point solutions with information blocking in particular that allow us to push back on these giants. And I think that's lost on so many.
Yeah, talk through that a little bit more and why is it lost and what specifically about it would help a company that's new to the space compete in that and really bring that 10x value if they have really wrapped their understanding around the implications of information blocking.
Yeah. We tend to think at HD at why, what, and how in that order.
Okay.
And so if you have your
Okay.
why, the
Okay.
why is that 10x value. Like we're providing physicians with no more pajama time. Okay, great. That's incredible as a why. What? Like what is the solution doing, the workflow to accomplish that? And then finally, how? How do you do that integration? And then what if you are going to provide so much value, then you can afford to spend to get to that ceiling of your so that you're not limited. And so people often get to that point and they say, wow, this is complex. And that's true. The
It is.
EHRs are complex. Like
Right.
this is not consumer software. This is not your iPhone or something where we all have deep empathy because we use it every day. The average person, developer, or whatever, has no empathy for what a doctor who's a cardiologist or a nephrologist or actually does. And
Right.
so the massive surface area of understanding all those workflows, all those different nuances gets they say, why is it so complex? Well, that is just a function of the jobs to be done, the massive compounding intricate jobs to be done of healthcare providers, nurses, registrars, of everybody that's involved. That's one barrier is that they simplify and they think just in terms of the ambulatory flow that they've done with their PCP and say, well, that's just it. It's like, okay, we haven't seen inpatient. That's one big barrier I see. The other is they just look and they say, wow, like there's all these integration methods I have to deal with, all these APIs and interfaces, like, and why is it so complex? Well, it's downstream of all that complexity of the actual workflows. There are many data structures. There are many different, there's referrals, there's scheduling, there's clinical documentation of,
They all build on each other.
yeah. And so that is just to educate somebody that doesn't know that is a huge burden to pass that knowledge, and it has to be learned. Um, but supposing they do, and supposing they know what they want to do, and they suppose they now are at that how, they have to be open to the fact that it's going to take a lot. It's going to take Fire. It's going to take HL7. It's going to take X12. It's going to take screen scraping or direct to database. If you want to do your 10x workflow, it's going to take a lot. And that's scary to people. They say, why can't it be easy? And I think that we're kind of a little bit of babies in healthcare in that regard, in that that is the case everywhere.
Yeah.
Like for B2B
Right.
software, that it is always complex. They don't always have APIs. You do have to screen scrape. And I think if you look at like ed tech or property management or these other parallel industries, you see that time and time again. But they then say, oh, I'm being blocked. Epic is blocking me. eClinicalWorks is blocking me. EHR is blocking me. That is an excuse because in healthcare, because of the Cures Act, we have the information blocking rule. And for a while, it's been like, what is that going to manifest as? But that says if a information blocking actor, a provider, a certified technology vendor, or health information network is blocking the access, exchange, or use of EHI, electronic health information, which is exceedingly broad, then that could be information blocking if they don't prove an exception. And we're seeing court cases now, in particular
Right.
real-time medical systems and point-click care, that say, hey, you really have to prove the exception EHR vendor. And so
Mhm.
the net for information blocking for the app to prove that there's been blocking is really quite easy. And then the exceptions, which fall to the defendant, to the EHR vendor, are quite hard. And so this stick is a way to push, to get what is necessary out of EHR vendors, to go and say, so and so EHR vendor, not even Epic. I feel like I'm being blocked, and I need to be able to access this data element, and I can do so through screen scraping. Can I do that? If they say no, they have to offer you an alternative manner, an API, an interface, and a different path. And if they don't, that is information blocking, and they can be submitted as an
So,
information blocking complaint, or it could be even a court case we're finding out.
so what role do the customers of both the EHR vendor and this company that feels they may be in blocked? What role do they have in this interaction in this these multiple complex relationships?
So if this is why value is important, because if you were
Mhm.
just an app and you go to Epic or eClinicalWorks or whatever and say, hey, I want access to APIs, there's no legal right for that. Like that one's much more like that's much shakier like grounds. But if you have a provider organization that
Mhm.
wants this workflow and is being denied it, because of anti-competitive reasons from the HR, being denied from their certified technology vendor, then the courts are saying actually, like this favors they're going to bias towards the providers. They're going to bias towards the providers. So you need the buy-in of you need to proven value. You need to have a health system or health care organization, provider organization that actually wants to use you. But once you do, it really empowers you to push on these EHR vendors to get a path. And if they can't offer a path, then they're at risk. And that is a I feel for EHR vendors here, like that's a ton of burden. Like that is a ton of burden as a software creator to have to deal with every field of reading and writing to give a path. Like
Right.
that is
Right.
unprecedented across any industry as it's not a direct technical requirement, but you trace the arc of this, that's where it goes. Like that's a tremendous burden. It's not just on Epic; it's on the dinkiest,
Um,
smallest certified EHR, and so
right.
that will cause consolidation in the market. We will see small EHRs that potentially are unable to deal with
They
this
can't deal with that.
regulatory burden, and so I feel for them in that regard. But the point of the regulation is not to, and this is kind of crazy, is not to allow for greater competition in the EHR market. It is actually saying, you know what, that's kind of settled in some ways, and we're going to make sure that those EHRs, which hold so much power, they're not using it in anti-competitive ways. They're not using it to block information, and that disruptive solutions, the people that will lead us to a post EHR world, are going to be able to connect and do their jobs to be done. And so that's really interesting as a strategy from the government to get us to the next era of technology in healthcare.
Well, and I think you've really kind of hit the nail on the head. So many companies will come to us and say, technically, we can exchange data. We've reached out to Epic, but they're not getting back to us, or whoever. And what is kind of backwards in that thinking is that if you're trying to do it through a technological way or through directly going to the vendor without getting that customer's buy in or that customer being willing to fight for you or advocate for you with their EHR vendor, That's a problem. That gets back to you're not delivering enough value to get on the radar screen of the customers. And as busy as they are, they get hundreds and hundreds of opportunities every day to digitize something. And unless it's a real pressing problem, or something that's kind of a top priority for them, they're never even going to give you the time of day. So that's really probably the hard part for a lot of new companies in this industry, given the complexity you've talked about, is not just having a good strategy or a good product, but having a great strategy and a great product that those customers are going to really kind of wake up and go, yes, I need that. Is that fair from your perspective?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It
Hmm.
starts with you have the great idea, go make it, go sell it, validate it in the market, and get buy-in. And then once you have that buy-in, it's a superpower to unlock whatever you want that no other industry has in a B2B enterprise. You're in I keep doing property management. I have some friends that work in it, but like you want to go integrate with Yardi, like they're going to say, okay, like meet our parameters or F off. Like we're not going to deal with you. And that is,
Right,
you have no lever. You have very few levers to do anything. You have to go kind of scrape and like cat and mouse game. Here,
right,
like we see AHRs now saying, you know what, we don't have a path for that. You can use RPA. You can go screen scrape this data element because we don't want to block you. That has happened
right,
to our customers, which is insane. Never would have
right.
happened a decade ago.
No, it
Uh,
wouldn't
and
have.
and so it's not the right path. I don't know that screen scraping and RPA is, but it puts pressure on EHRs to rapidly release APIs to get that sort of headlessness is the technical term for this type of architecture where you have not just your UI, but equivalent APIs for almost every function.
Well, one other thing I'll also share with these companies, I'd like your take on it, is back to this 10x value is not only do you need to truly drive ROI, truly have, that great strategy and that great product, you got to know the history. You got to know what everybody else has tried before, what didn't work, what kind of worked, and what's working so today. You've got to be able to speak to that because this industry can kind of vet you out really quickly if you've just got a great idea and you don't have the knowledge or exposure to the complexity of the environment and what's been tried before. So, given all of this, and we've talked about the information blocking, but are there any other weaknesses or strategies that you think are important for companies to know about what makes these big enterprise vendors or the epics of the world, what are their weaknesses and how can you um, compete or collaborate with them in a new and different way, given where they are not as strong?
Yeah, I mean, weaknesses I think is the wrong way to focus. Like, there's 100 different workflows to be improved. There's 1,000 different workflows to
That's
be improved.
great. I
Yeah,
like
yeah,
hearing that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And so, like, is it valuable enough to the enterprise to be prioritized? One thing that people are afraid of because of the history of Epic is, like, should they do the app program, which is now called vendor services? And
Hmm.
so they should, is the takeaway. So vendor services app Orchard, the original app program, lengthy approval process, took months, lot of services, very expensive though. Took, there's a revenue share component. And so now vendor services is much more lightweight. It's like the base price is like 1,900 a year. And you should just, you should do it for why give yourself any friction and barrier to a little bit closer relationship to Epic in terms of, so you can actually ask their technical support some questions, read some extra documentation, have additional resources. So I would lean into the app programs of the EHR vendors, and they're not. There's ample room for improvement of them, but like people don't need to be afraid of them. There's no approval process anymore, and it's no
Right.
longer a revenue share. It's just that annual fee plus some other fees that you may incur as you get more mature in what you're doing. But um, I think it's certainly not Apple's App Store program taking a 30% cut or something like that, because that's now illegal. Like that is now,
They can't
because
do that.
yeah,
Right.
because the Cures Act, you have to charge as an EHR vendor, commensurately with the effort and work that you're doing, essentially.
So several vendors have complained to me or mentioned, let's say, just say mentioned to me that the certification process with the Epics of the world and with Epic is much more challenging than it used to be. I mean, what's your take on getting going beyond the vendor services program to some of their other more involved programs? What's your take on those?
There is no certification.
Okay,
so,
that's
so
fair.
like, there's three. You join vendor services, and that is their developer program, and you get access to, you can submit these tickets for technical services people to look at. You can submit requests for alternative, what's called an interoperability request for access to proprietary APIs, reporting database access, all these sort of eccentric connectivity methods, and
Hmm.
they tell you if it's right to your use case. So that's one thing. On the other side is the marketplace showroom, and so showroom is their way for health systems and other buyers to discover everything that's out there. So it lists services, both external, internal, professional services that Epic offers or partners offer, as well as products that. So these would be, you know, um, and so in the product section, you have Connection Hub, Toolbox, Workshop. Connection Hub is not an approval. It's not a certification. People say, how do I get in there? I need to be listed before I can sell. Well, the key is inside the box. The only way you can Connection Hub, the only way is if you were live with one or more Epic site. And so you just need to go get connected. You need to actually,
That's circling back right back to the customers have to want you.
yeah, exactly. And like, you go get connected. You don't need to be part of vendor services. You can just say, hey, I'm live. They validate, and then you get listed, and you pay them $500 a year or something like that just for the listing. But it's trivial. And then the reason they did that is because people were saying, you go to these digital health apps and they say, oh, I'm connected to 500 EHRs, and they list Epic, and it would be BS. So they'd be selling it ahead of where they are. And so this is a validated list of apps that have connected to Epic. That's Connection Hub. Period. Full stop. No other services necessary or included except just that listing. As Epic refines the developer program, they are finding common use cases. And they're saying,
Mm,
you know what? Let's define a paved path. This is the way you do the workflow. And then we can just give out these specs and people can follow them for automate dispensed, carousels, for meds or for payment processors or like whatever the use case is. And so the toolbox categories are these paved paths where they say, hey, you're doing this, here's the workflow, just here's the access to the right APIs, the right things to accomplish what you want to do. And if you follow this, you get this special status. You follow the blueprint, you get the special status to be in the toolbox. But that's it. Like, you pay them for proprietary APIs like you would in vendor services, but you know
right.
it just says, hey, we're doing this in the way that Epic thinks is the right way for the workflow. Now, that may not be the way you want to do the workflow, especially if you want to be differentiated. So it's not always the best path to be a toolbox, follow a toolbox. For instance,
Right.
if I'm building the ambient scribe, their ambient scribe toolbox category is based on Haiku and Canto. They're two
Right.
mobile apps. That's
Right.
terrible. That's a depend. I don't
Right.
want to be launching from them. I want to be launching from Hyperspace, or I want to be launching standalone. And so it is a strategy to do toolbox. Is also a strategy to go and just do vendor services and build the
Right.
workflow you want. And you should have no barriers to accomplishing the way you want because of information blocking.
Who are some companies that are out there that you think do very well in this collaborative ecosystem with Epic? That they hold their own, they're out doing their stuff, and it works in the Epic world.
Every Epic hospital has hundreds of applications that orbit around and are successful in their own right. And so I struggle to pick one. Like if you're doing something valuable, then you're going to be hospitals are going to choose you. And so I think it's hard to pick one that that stands out as like just crushing it.
But your point is that there are many, and those that decry the I can't get in because of Epic, they're probably not offering that value, or maybe they have a good product but not a great product. something.
or they haven't figured out the enterprise sale, right? Like that is a muscle and skill set that is so divergent from a consumer focused, direct to consumer sale. It is so divergent from even just an SMB sale where I go to
Right.
someone who's on eClinicalWorks, right? It's like one doc. I say, look at this beautiful ambient scribe. Don't you want this? And they go, yeah, I want that. And then the buyer is the decision maker. And as soon as you divorce the buyer and the decision maker, that is a muscle to navigate the politics, to navigate the prioritization, to help show such value in the scales that the head of IT and the CRO and others are using to prioritize projects, to show such value in light of the cost that you incur, the opportunity cost that you incur, the security risk you incur, like all the other things that give them a reason to say no. And so I think a lot of apps, especially scrappy startups, that they just don't have that muscle necessarily. I advise a bunch of companies personally over the years, and I've seen the apps that just sort of have it, or that need, and the ones that don't, that need to hire. And so like Vitalize Care is a Y Combinator company that I advise, and like they're just really good at it. They're like mid-20s now, maybe young 20s, and like somehow know exactly how to navigate the organizational politics and find the right people and get buy-in. And that was not something I had to teach them or anyone had to teach them. But a lot of times it does need to be taught or brought in, because it is challenging to have the departmental head say, oh yeah, this is great, and then say, why do we never kick off? Why do we never make it to integration?
Well, and I've seen so many companies, they say, oh, I'm working with XYZ health system. And I start asking questions, and it turns out they're in with one surgeon or one department or one whatever, and they really haven't made that enterprise sale. They just have gotten a small project or whatever. And so I've heard this from many companies. It's knowing how to qualify and understand the differences, because you've seen one health system, knowing how to build those relationships, prove that ROI, prove that value. All of that is much tougher sometimes than building an app or a nice digital tool. So I'm curious if we're kind of at I guess a fork in the road in terms of things like AI coming in and being embedded in many other in many offerings, more so than it was even a few years ago, and kind of new types of technology integrated into solutions, and virtual care, et cetera, all this big state of change. Do you see Epic's dominance continuing over the next decade? You mentioned earlier, things might be changing, but what would it take for someone, a competitor, someone who's out there now, or maybe somebody that's not even playing in healthcare today, to really meaningfully challenge them in that large health system market?
So systems of record, right? Like if you divide software into 4 categories, you're either systems of record, the core, point of truth for something, a job process within an organization, point solutions that orbit them, infrastructure that underpins them, and then networks, things that connect enterprises.
Right.
Systems of record in almost every industry have not changed for 25 years, because at the enterprise level, at the lower end, we see Epic's not dominant at the lower end, right? Like Epic's not dominant in PT, they're not dominant in behavioral health, they're not dominant in these lower, more fragmented side of things. But at the enterprise level, the largest organizations, they are. And in any
Yes.
industry, you see SAP and Oracle and ERP, you see Yardi and PM and property management systems, you see I forget EdTech, but like you can just see the same trend of these, just some software, Manhattan Associates in like trucking or something. Like you see the same trend of these large enterprises in the 2000s, maybe the 90s, that just like were built, and the switching costs are the barrier. And the switching cost for a practice is low, but still expensive. The
Right.
switching costs for an enterprise is just
Impossible.
astronomical.
It's impossible in today's economic environment for sure.
And so, what is one optimism or threat to a change is, can switching costs be lowered? Is the ultimate question. Is like that is the main mode. Network effects like is another strategy, that Epic has done pretty successfully. But ignoring that, just switching costs. How do
Hmm.
you reduce that to zero or near zero, at least for the data migration? Well, maybe AI can help with that, right? Like
Hmm.
if you could say, hey, try before you buy it, switch over and do the data migration and check it out. Like that is a way and a path to that is the reducing the barrier to that choice, to that choice to make this huge monumental project and implementation that will be disruptive to an enterprise organization. That's one point of optimism, right? That
Right.
AI is really good at rote things, and what is more rote than like data mapping and migration and things like that. Doesn't solve retraining, but AI helps with retraining, right? Like a AI bot could sit alongside providers and train.
Right.
And then reintegration of all the orbiting systems or replacement. And so it is still challenging, but like that is the barrier, and that is common across most B2B software that I think people ignore, and they think healthcare is unique. It's like, no, this actually exists in almost every industry, that there are dominant, like in banking, you have Fiserv, FIS, and Jack Henry, right? Like they've been around since the 2000s or earlier. It's super common. And that's one point of optimism, to just like change to a new EHR. But actually, the actual answer here is that every platform change, like every major incumbent software or hardware, has not been disrupted by a pure play competitor. It's been disrupted by the next evolution of technology. And
Right.
so Microsoft lost not because of the antitrust, Windows. It lost because of mobile. It failed at mobile. It failed as an incumbent to keep up with mobile.
Thing. That
And so,
thing.
yeah, exactly. And so, like, if you think about like any technological change, the person like IBM and the personal computer, like it's always a platform change. And so then the question, that's the question: what is the next platform change? How do we change how technology? We move from the rigid SaaS of today, rigid software of today, the user interfaces, to something different. Is it a hardware change? Is it a technology change? And the one that is like abundant, like I'm not the only one saying this, but like everyone is predicting it, so maybe that means that it's wrong. It is AI. That
Right.
AI as a fundamentally changing not just the software to interact with the business, but to change how businesses are run, means that like, well, EHRs is software, user interface software, SaaS, how we interact with technology in a decade, is a very valid question. So it could be that, it could be,
Well,
the
for that matter, AI is changing dramatically, as we speak. We started out, with the chat GPTs and the generational AIs, but now we're moving into AI that actually can make the decision, not just provide content and answer questions. So it's that, being tied to the workflow, et cetera. I mean, it is evolving probably faster than most companies and most organizations can even track it. I mean, it's moving so fast.
Right, exactly. And that's a really good point. Like we are focused so acutely on co-pilots, the scribes, right? Like let's 10x our employees, but the 100x improvement for an organization, an enterprise, is agents, is where we can add autonomous AI to do jobs, because that's 100x improvement
Oh yeah.
to, and it is scary. And the social mores, the regulatory boundaries, those barriers will slow it and cause people to say, oh, look at this study, it didn't perform well enough. But like that is a compute problem, and compute problems always inevitably, because of Moore's law and other similar parallels, go away as we
Right.
progress. And we are, as you're saying, we're progressing so fast that it's like, if your point to say why this won't happen, agents and things like that, is to point at like it underperforming, then you're missing how technology trends have always evolved for the past 4 decades,
Well,
and
and,
that's
and
some.
how do you think Epic is doing in the AI world? Or, I mean, do you see it? I'm sure it's top of mind with them, like it is everybody else. But are they kind of current on it, or are they a little behind, or a little ahead? I mean, where do you see them falling out in terms of their AI play?
I think that they're doing so. One thing we didn't talk about was workshop, which is the most collaborative level of the showroom of the
Right.
relation, and that is right now people focus on that one because they look in there and there's a few organizations, and one of them is a Bridge, which is a startup, but a very successful startup.
Yes, very familiar with them. They just won a class award at Vive
Yeah,
for that.
very contentiously, because actually, like the cutoff was 15 orgs, and Ambience outperformed them, but was
Uh,
only at 14 orgs. So like,
oh,
yeah. So very contentiously, but they're very good software. I know their
right.
team very well, and they're growing like hotcakes. I don't know, but
Yeah.
and that relationship, it's worth noting, is interesting because it's Epic inviting people in to say, we don't know how to build the APIs and integration points necessary for success with these emergent technologies. Build it with us, co-develop. So they invite one or two or three or four of that type of any given category to co-develop the APIs and then release them to the rest of the world. But because they're co-developing, those companies get a head start and then accrue some market share. So people say they're king making. I don't know that that's true in the sense that it's information blocking if they're to create these APIs and not release them
To the world, right.
to the world. And
Right.
they've said, even Judy in her interview said, this is what we're doing. We're releasing them to the world. But it does give them a head start, which allows them to have an advantage, which allows them to win some
Because
deals.
then they're working on the next thing. So
Yeah, exactly. They're always a little ahead, but
yeah.
there's other ways to compete on cost, on different features, on things, and so like futility is not the right answer for any other scribe company. It's to go and focus in, or to say, you know what, the Epic market, there will be boundaries for AI scribes and other things along EHRs for sure. We're already seeing that develop. And so you go win other markets, go win the behavioral health market, go win, my wife is a social worker. She would love a scribe that
There
worked
you
with
go.
simple practice.
Right.
But so that's one AI thing. The other is that they are doing 100 different initiatives layered across their entire stack.
Right.
And that's an iterative approach that people are like, well, look at Cerner. Look at Cerner taking this big cut. Oracle's building this
Right.
new native electronic health record. At first, I was bullish on that, on Oracle's attempt there, because I said, oh, wow, like this could be, we're talking about platform change and things like that.
Right. The next. Right.
But there's two risks I see. One is there's a switching cost potentially, unless they negate that. That is, but like we talked about earlier, a reason to change EHRs is a reason to
Right.
give people a reason to go to Epic or other competitors. So that's got to be negated by seamless switching costs, right? They have to say, oh, if you want to switch over to our new EHR, it's just automatic. Like you don't even need to worry about it. If they don't do that, then that's a risk. They'll lose some customers just by nature of the switch. The second is, and you see this, I keep going back to Apple, but like Apple with their AI products is getting destroyed in the news this week and last week because they announced this big cut. This like we're doing all the AI stuff. You can look up when your mom's landing on our flight. You can place an order for pizza. You can do just all the AI will take care of everything. And they've struggled to release the big cuts, this big things. And
It's like they're trying to boil the ocean as opposed to just making things work at a very knock this one out, then knock this one out, then knock that one out.
exactly. And like, why not with distribution advantage? If you have distribution advantage, then you can get by with releasing good enough features, because you're a default, to improve the experience, then they will
Yeah.
be adopted. And
Yeah.
so it is a big cut, and maybe they need it because they are losing market share and they need to just totally shake things up. As a product strategy, that's bold and ambitious, but I worry about the Apple, what we're seeing in Cupertino with Apple taking this big cut and now having lost so much goodwill because they didn't do the basics of and also play to their strengths of distribution advantage. So that's my worry for Oracle. And to Epic, it's a good strategy for them. They have distribution advantage, and that is what you should play to. Is just continue to pound out features that are the default, that make the life of physicians better, or make the back office more efficient, improve ROI, and you negate competitive threats, and you make you serve your customers ultimately. So that's one thought. One other question you asked about that I didn't get to is that two major threats to Epic beyond the platform shift, beyond someone negating switching costs, are antitrust and information blocking. And so we see an antitrust case against Epic by Particle Health
Right.
this past fall. I'm not super bullish on that particular slant of antitrust, but like I'm also not a lawyer. I'm just like I like these
Right.
things.
Just because of market definition, which is important for that. But Epic does have dominant market share in acute hospitals. And
If that if there are cases to be made about their behaviors that could be portrayed as anti-competitive in terms of them bundling their software together such that it's zero cost versus accrue any competing software would accrue some cost either by what they
Right.
charge or the API usage they invoke. And so like that has some risk of antitrust. And so it gets to a cultural shift that Epic needs to make. And the second is information blocking. Before I get to the cultural shift, information blocking, as I mentioned, is a huge weapon to be wielded against EHRs, and people will wield it against Epic now that the door is open by point click care and also a smaller case into scare versus RTZ. And
Right.
so that is a threat that they need to be cognizant of, and a cultural shift of how they interact with competing technology and developers. It is not perhaps not fair. They may say we've always acted like this, but to be in first place, to be dominant requires 100% changing culture, 100% changing how you interact, or you will lose cases like we see with Google in antitrust and with others in antitrust as antitrust winds have shifted, not just under Biden, but under Trump 1, Biden, and now Trump 2.
Right.
Antitrust is back in a way
Yes.
that every market dominant player should be aware of, and Epic is a market dominant player.
Right. For sure. Okay. Well, I have appreciated your insights so much today. And I always close my conversations by asking one question. I always ask, what's the one thing we haven't talked about today that you think is really important, an important part of this conversation?
I think we can all get myopically focused on uh, all the industry things, and something that having a kid has reminded me is just like let's just touch grass and like get outside and like interact with people in this
Right.
world that and conference season was really good for this in terms of interacting with people in person. It's just really nice to not be stuck behind the computer screen at home if you work from home or whatever, and to just build empathy, build rapport, build understanding through in-person connection. And so like that's maybe soppy to end with, but like I don't know,
But,
just touch
but you
grass
know,
and
that's
and see people.
That's always been kind of in my mind the heart of being successful as a professional in our industry. It is one of those industries that people still want to know who you know and what is your relationship with, and do you have the war stories? And you're not going to do that behind the computer screen. You do need to see them at HIMSS or at Vive or some other meeting, or work with them on a project. I mean, that really does sort out the differences in those that are successful in this industry and those that struggle, is having those relationships. I don't think it's sappy at all. I 100% agree with you. So it makes a lot of sense.
Well,
So
cool.
thanks so much. And hope you have a great week or month or year.
Yeah, can't wait to see you at the next conference. And thanks for having me on, Pam.
All right. Thanks so much, Brendan. I appreciate it.